In 1834, Giuseppe Mazzini, an influential Italian revolutionary leader, was chosen by a secretive group known as the Illuminati to lead their global revolutionary agenda. He held this position until his death in 1872. Prior to his demise, Mazzini managed to entice an American military figure named Albert Pike into joining the Illuminati. Pike, captivated by the concept of a unified global government, eventually ascended to the role of the chief architect behind this controversial conspiracy, often associated with Luciferian ideologies. Between the years 1859 and 1871, Pike devised a comprehensive military strategy outlining 3 world conflicts and numerous revolutions spanning the globe. These conspirators were not concerned with immediate triumphs, but rather operated with a long-term perspective. Pike's plan was both straightforward and effective. It aimed to harness various international movements such as communism, Nazism, and political Zionism to incite 3 global conflicts and at least 2 significant revolutions. The orchestrators of the grand conspiracy set their sights on implementing the next crucial steps towards achieving their ultimate goal of a global government. The initial step in their plan was to initiate World War I. Why choose war? It's simple. The only justification for a centralized world government is the promise of peace. And what stirs people's desire for peace more than war itself? War brings chaos, destruction, and exhaustion. It affects both victors and losers, inflicting economic ruin upon nations. Most significantly, it claims the lives of countless young men, leaving grief-stricken parents longing for peace at any cost. The conspirators relied on this emotional response to advance their diabolical plot throughout the 19th century, from 1814 to 1914, when the world as a whole was at peace. Occasional conflicts such as the Franco-Prussian War, the American Civil War, or the Russo-Japanese War were localized disturbances that had minimal impact on the rest of the world. Great nations prospered during this time, with their citizens displaying staunch nationalism and a strong sense of sovereignty. The idea that the French and Germans, the Turks and Russians, or the Chinese and Japanese would willingly submit to a global government seemed inconceivable. It was equally unimaginable that rulers such as Kaiser Wilhelm, Franz Joseph, or Tsar Nicholas, among others, would surrender their thrones to such a one-world government. The conspirators knew that only one thing could ignite the people's yearning for peace under a global government: a dreadful and devastating war. This war couldn't be a minor conflict confined to 2 nations. It had to be a world war. Every major nation had to experience the horrors and devastation of this conflict, fueling a universal cry for peace. This was the blueprint established by the Illuminati and Nathan Rothschild at the turn of the 19th century. They maneuvered Europe into the Napoleonic Wars and subsequently manipulated the Congress of Vienna, intending to transform it into a League of Nations, a precursor to their envisioned global government, much like the present-day United Nations. This was the framework adopted by the House of Rothschild and Jacob Schiff to fulfill their objectives in 1914. They were aware that this format had failed in 1814 due to the interference of the Tsar. However, the conspirators of 1914 were determined to eliminate any obstacles that might arise, ensuring there would be no Tsar to disrupt their plans. The First World War was to be fought so as to enable the Illuminati to destroy Tsarism and Russia, as vowed by Rothschild after the Tsar had torpedoed his scheme at the Congress in Vienna, and to transform Russia into a stronghold of Atheistic-Communism. The differences stirred up by agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires were to be used to foment this war. After the war would be ended, communism was to be built up and used to destroy other governments and weaken religions. History records that World War I was precipitated by a trivial incident, the kind of incident both Weishaupt and Albert Pike had incorporated in their blueprints. That incident was the assassination of an Austrian archduke, arranged by the Illuminati masterminds. The war followed. It involved Germany, Austria, Hungary, and their allies, so-called the Axis powers against France, Britain, and Russia, called the Allies. Only the United States was not involved during the first 2 years. Kaiser Wilhelm II led Germany to its destruction in World War I. Crippled since birth with a useless arm, Kaiser Wilhelm was the grandson of Queen Victoria and the great-uncle of the current Queen Elizabeth II. His decision to appoint Max Warburg as the head of Germany's Secret Service was no coincidence. The Warburgs and Rothschilds held control over Germany's central bank, known as the Reichsbank, which had been established by Mayor Rothschild. Max and Felix Warburg actively contributed to financing Germany's war efforts in World War I, while their brother Paul Warburg of Kuhn and Loeb facilitated financing for the American side by selling war bonds through the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. The printing presses of the Rothschilds and Warburgs tirelessly churned out debt money on both sides of the Atlantic. By 1916, Germany appeared to be on the verge of victory in the First World War, without a single shot fired on German soil. German submarines wreaked havoc on British convoys in the Atlantic. The French army experienced mutinies, and the Russian army was plagued by defections. In a precarious position, British Prime Minister Lloyd George faced pressure. It was then that Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists presented a compelling offer to the British government. If they promised Palestine to them, the Zionists would bring the United States into the war as an ally and secure victory. In April 1917, President Woodrow Wilson received the green light and declared war on Germany. Due to the significant opposition to the war, Wilson implemented the draft and passed the Espionage Act. Billions of dollars in taxpayer money were funneled into the British war machine. In return, the British government composed the renowned Balfour Declaration, specifically addressed to Lord Lionel Rothschild. This declaration pledged Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists. Consequently, the Holy Land was conquered, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine through a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations, which designated Palestine as the British Mandate. By 1917, the conspirators had successfully achieved their primary objective. Europe was ravaged by destitution, and its weary inhabitants cried out for peace. The outcome was already predetermined. The United States would soon join the Allies, and this was set to happen immediately after Wilson's re-election. Complete victory for the Allies was the only anticipated result. During Wilson's campaign for re-election in 1916, his main appeal was centered on keeping American sons out of the war. However, the Republican Party publicly accused Wilson of secretly committing to involve the nation in the war. They claimed that if he were defeated, he would enact this plan during his remaining 2 months in office. But if re-elected, he would delay until after securing his second term. At that time, the American people regarded Wilson as an almost divine figure. As anticipated by the conspirators, Wilson was re-elected. And according to their schedule, he propelled the United States into the war in 1917. He used the sinking of the Lusitania as a pretext, an event that had also been prearranged. Similarly, Roosevelt, who was also held in high esteem by the American public, employed a similar tactic in 1941. He used the premeditated attack on Pearl Harbor as a justification for involving the United States in World War II. Just as the conspirators planned, an Allied victory would result in the removal of monarchs from defeated nations, leaving their people leaderless, confused, bewildered, and perfectly primed for the establishment of the one-world government envisioned by the Great Conspiracy. The subsequent events are well-known history. The revolution in Russia unfolded, leading to the brutal execution of every member of the royal Romanov family. Communism is an integral part of the Illuminati's grand conspiracy to enslave the entire world. Communism is merely a tool and a fear-inducing term used by the conspirators to terrify people worldwide. Furthermore, the conquest of Russia and the establishment of communism were largely orchestrated by Schiff and other international bankers. Charlie Knickerbocker, a columnist for Hearst newspapers, published an interview with John Schiff, Jacob Schiff's grandson. In this interview, young Schiff confirmed the entire story and revealed that his grandfather had contributed $20 million to the cause. All records indicate that when Lenin and Trotsky orchestrated the takeover of Russia, they operated as leaders of the Bolshevik Party. Bolshevism, however, is a purely Russian term. The masterminds behind the conspiracy realized that Bolshevism could only be marketed as an ideology to the Russian people. Consequently, in April 1918, Jacob Schiff dispatched Colonel House to Moscow with instructions for Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin to change the name of their regime to the Communist Party and to adopt Karl Marx's manifesto as the party's constitution. Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin obeyed, and it was in that year, 1918, that the Communist Party and the menace of communism came into existence. These facts are confirmed in Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 5th edition. In short, communism was created by the capitalists themselves. Therefore, until November 11, 1918, the conspirators' diabolical plan worked flawlessly. All the major nations, including the United States, were weary from war, devastated, and mourning their fallen soldiers. Peace was the universal desire. So when Wilson proposed the establishment of a League of Nations to ensure peace, all the nations, with no Russian czar to oppose them, eagerly embraced the idea without even reading the fine print of that insurance policy. All nations, that is, except for one, the United States. The conspirators least expected the United States to resist their plans. It was their fatal miscalculation. You see, when they positioned Woodrow Wilson in the White House, they believed they had the United States in their grasp. Wilson had been masterfully portrayed as a great humanitarian, a godlike figure in the eyes of the American people. The conspirators had every reason to believe that Wilson could easily persuade Congress to accept the League of Nations. However, there was one man in the Senate in 1918 who saw through their scheme, much like the Russians had in 1840. This man possessed significant political stature, rivaling that of Teddy Roosevelt, and was equally astute. He commanded respect and trust from members of both houses of Congress and the American people. That man was Henry Cabot Lodge, one of America's greatest patriots. On November 11, 1918, an armistice was signed, effectively halting hostilities on the Western Front. The guns fell silent, marking the end of the Great War. The world collectively breathed a sigh of relief as the devastating conflict came to a close. The First World War, known ironically as the War to End All Wars, carries a profound historical significance. However, it is crucial to recognize that this conflict was only the initial phase of Pike's master plan and that the bloodshed was just getting started.